Welcome back to Home Field Trivia. Thanks for joining us for our Las Vegas Raiders quiz. Like and subscribe for more content and leave a comment below. The Raiders franchise was founded in 1960 as a charter member of the AFL. True or false? That is true. The team has always been based in Las Vegas since its founding. That is false. Al Davis once held the roles of head coach, general manager, and owner of the Raiders. That is true. The Raiders won their first Super Bowl in the 1976 season. That is true. The Raiders lost Super Bowl 15 to the Philadelphia Eagles. That is false. The Raiders were the first NFL team to hire a Latino head coach, Tom Flores. That is true. Marcus Allen was named MVP of Super Bowl 18. That is true. The Raiders' 2002 Super Bowl appearance was their most recent trip to the big game. That is true. Bo Jackson played both professional football for the Raiders and professional baseball. That is true. The Raiders moved to Las Vegas in 2020 and now play at Allegiant Stadium. That is true. The Raiders were the first NFL team to relocate 3 times. That is true. The Raiders' second Super Bowl victory came against the Minnesota Vikings. That is false. Ken Stabler was nicknamed the Snake. That is true. Charles Woodson won the Heisman Trophy before becoming a star with the Raiders. That is true. The Raiders were the first team in NFL history to appear in the Super Bowl from a wild card spot. That is true. Derek Carr was drafted in the first round by the Raiders in 2014. That is false. Al Davis' famous slogan was "Commitment to Excellence." That is true. The Raiders' only Hall of Fame wide receiver is Fred Biletnikoff. That is false. The Raiders' Super Bowl 18 win was by a margin of 29 points. That is true. John Madden never won a Super Bowl as head coach of the Raiders. That is false. The Raiders have played in both the AFC and NFC. That is false. Rich Gannon was the NFL MVP in 2002 when he led the Raiders to the Super Bowl. That is true. The Raiders lost Super Bowl 37 to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That is true. Bo Jackson's football career was cut short due to a hip injury. That is true. The Raiders' first draft pick ever was quarterback Ken Stabler. That is false. The Raiders have won exactly 3 Super Bowls. That is true. The Raiders training camp has historically been held in Napa, California. That is true. The Raiders were originally supposed to be called the Oakland Seniors. That is true. The Raiders are tied with the Pittsburgh Steelers for the most Super Bowl victories. That is false. The Raiders' first game in Las Vegas was played without fans due to COVID-19 restrictions. That is true. Thanks for joining us for our Raiders quiz. Like and subscribe for more content, leave a comment below, and join us again next time.